Introduction to Daxuan Wusheng. 1,000-year-old dynasty will eventually usher in decay, and a 100-year-old family will eventually return to dust. Why is immortality in the world? Is it an indestructible body forged through countless trials and tribulations, or is it a martial arts will that combines heaven and earth? Chen Mu came to this world, wielding a knife and walking forward. Looking back, countless heavenly pride and millennium-old demons had turned into dust, leaving only one person on the road paved with yellow sand. Chapter 1. Service. You are listening at novel full.audio. A ray of dawn breaks through the night and sprinkles on a magnificent ancient city wall. The reign of King Daxuan has been established for nearly 1,000 years, with corrupt officials and corrupt officials. The faint golden light illuminates this county city, illuminating every magnificent or dilapidated building, but cannot illuminate the dark and corrupt hearts. Chen Mu was dressed in a standard military uniform, carrying a wide-edged knife at his waist, walking between narrow alleys. The pungent smell of blood filled the air, causing him to furrow his brows slightly. I walked a little further forward. On both sides of the widened road, there were 7 or 8 corpses lying horizontally and vertically. Their shape was extremely brutal, as if they had been cut by a random knife, almost unrecognizable. One side of the house wall was even covered with a lot of flesh and blood. Hey, it's from the Black Sand Gang. It seems like they've all been wiped out now. Another servant standing next to Chen Mu sighed and said, "A year ago, no one dared to provoke the Black Sand Gang in this area, but the one above them collapsed and gradually declined. Now, even a few kittens have been wiped out. Shoo, stop talking, don't care about our business, sweep the floor." The third officer gestured to remain silent, then picked up the guy and approached, preparing to clean up the street. Chen Mu frowned as he watched the tragic scene, but in the end, he just shook his head. Having been in this world for 2 years, he had seen such a scene more than once. This seemingly magnificent county town was actually a chaotic land filled with chaos, conflict, and slaughter. Such gang fights and exterminations are common, even in the seemingly solemn inner city where corpses are thrown out every day. These servants claim to be on duty, but in reality, they are only responsible for sweeping the floor afterwards. Chen Mu once saw that a colleague had said a few more words due to being drunk, but the next day the body inexplicably appeared in the ditch, and there was no attention paid, not even a question asked. Sweep the floor. Chen Mu lifted his sleeves and fanned, dispelling the pungent smell of blood, and then followed a few colleagues. In fact, in this chaotic county town, the work of the servants is already considered very good. As long as they don't speak recklessly, don't interfere, don't contradict their superiors, and remain honest and obedient, they are basically safe, unlike those anxious poor people. To be able to obtain the job of a servant, I also want to thank his father who has not seen him many times. His father used to be an old servant and knew some people. When he fell seriously ill, he tried every means to arrange for him to work as a servant, and then he died. The work of this servant ultimately did not allow Chen Mu to live for long. Later, he died of a serious illness, and now Chen Mu is no longer the same as before, but a soul from Earth named Chen Mu has inherited this identity. Although Chen Mu was just a small person in his past life, he had been struggling at the bottom for many years and at least had the ability to observe and understand words. Therefore, even if he suddenly came to this unfamiliar world, he quickly stabilized and spent 2 years safely. A few people rushed forward to handle the body in a busy manner. Chen Mu, like the others, pretended to clean while casually groping on the corpse. This kind of touching of the corpse is basically a tacit understanding among these poor people, although it is generally difficult to touch anything, and basically some silver has been taken away long ago, but with good luck, they can occasionally pick up a little leak. For these underprivileged individuals, even if they can pick up a few scattered copper coins, it is still worth celebrating. Chen Mu fumbled through the clothes of the corpse he was handling, but it turned out to be empty. At the same time, he caught a glimpse of his accomplice Lu San not far away, who was carrying something into his pocket. Why is it always me who doesn't have it? Chen Mu felt a little puzzled in his heart. In the past 2 years, he had to deal with bodies that were not 300 or 200, but he had not been able to touch any silver, and there was almost no silver money. In total, there were only 2 or 3 times, and the amount was very small, with only a few scattered copper coins. Everyone has a tacit understanding, and he won't ask Lu San more about what he found, but it's obvious that he has something in stock. Chen Mu, who was a bit skeptical, handled the body on his side and went down to touch it. Suddenly, he felt a strange touch, but he actually touched something, as if it was a paper booklet. Chen Mu's heart suddenly shuddered. Silver and other valuable items can be taken, and if there are valuable pendants such as jade pendants, they can be taken casually. However, strange things cannot be taken casually, especially paper items, and it is unclear whether they will cause trouble. But after hesitating for a moment, Chen Mu lifted himself slightly and glanced at the booklet he had touched through the gap. However, he saw that it was a somewhat tattered yellow paper booklet, with the words, "Wind knife technique vaguely visible." Chen Mu's heart twitched slightly, but his hand calmly concealed his movements and quietly put away the booklet. If there are any books, maps or other things found on the corpse, it is best to treat them as not knowing. Firstly, it is useless to him, and secondly, it may cause trouble. However, if it is a broken knife technique, it should not be a big problem, and most likely it is something that others do not want. Otherwise, he would have been taken by the murderer at night. Lu San and others also noticed Chen Mu's movements, but after glancing at each other, they tacitly refused to come and ask. "Let's go." A few people were busy before and after, moving the body onto a small wooden cart, and then pushing the cart towards the outside of the city. Not far from the north of the city is the mass grave. Chen Mu, Lu Sanli, and others transported the bodies all the way to the place, and then threw them on the spot without burying them. There were wild wolves around here at night, and they happened to feed them. When they had time next day, they would hunt a few more wolves and sell a few wolf skins for wine. Of course, the fact is that none of the 3 people are willing to stay outside the city for a long time. In the city, their skin as servants still has some effect. When the war outside the city is chaotic, whoever cares who is who, staying an extra 15 minutes will add to the danger. A few people hurriedly threw away the body and returned to the city all the way, only to breathe a sigh of relief when they entered the city. "Chen, what did you say today? Let's go have a drink together." Lu San smiled and asked Chen Mu. He is actually not called Lu San, but his surname is Lu, with a single name of Song. However, he is the 3rd in the family, so he is called that. Chen Mu has a brother who died early and is the 2nd in the family, so others also call him Chen. "No, I can't." Chen Mu waved his hand. Drinking and eating meat, listening to music on Gulen, of course he also thought about it, but he was really shy in his pocket. The job of being a servant may seem relatively stable, but in reality, I can't get a few silver coins. Basically, I have been embezzled by the officials above, and what I get is barely enough for a normal day's food and drink. If I want to spend more money on flour wine, it's not enough at all. Moreover, Chen Mu's family now has a younger sister who is 7 years younger than him. She has to hide at home all day and dare not go out, which is equivalent to having one more person to support, far less than Lu San and others who are relatively well off. Lu Song smiled as he looked at Chen Mu, who was about to leave, and said, "Chen, your younger sister is almost at the age of getting married. Why don't I help you find a way to marry a wealthy family so that she can have no worries about food and clothing in the future? You can also get some silver money and live a much more comfortable life. What do you think?" Having worked with Chen Mu for several years, he knew about Chen Mu's situation. Initially, Chen Mu's father was seriously ill, and he spent his entire family to treat his illness. Now, he can't earn much money in front of a poor person and has to support a sister who is not convenient to work outside. It can only be said that compared to the lower class of the poor, he is not lacking in food and will not be hungry, but other aspects are not as satisfactory as expected. Upon hearing Lu Song's words, Chen Mu's mind flashed with the smiling face of a naive little girl. He smiled slightly at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com and said, "Wait for another 2 years, she's still too young." When he came to this world, his body was still seriously ill, with only Chen Yu, who was only 12 years old, accompanying him, passing him water and food to help his body slowly recover. Although he didn't have the feelings he had in the past 12 years, he had already recognized this sister through the 2 years of interaction. Moreover, even though he was new here, it was impossible for him to do anything to exchange her for silver. Such behavior was no different from that of a beast. "Okay, if you have any ideas, just tell my brother." Lu Song didn't force it either. He smiled and patted Chen Mu's shoulder, then took Li Lu to eat wine. Separated from Lu Song and others for the time being, Chen Mu walked along the lane, first came to the street, took out 10 pieces of Xian money at the corner, bought 2 coarse mantu, and then went home. This price. Chen Mu weighed the small amount of Xian left in his pocket and shook his head slightly. According to the past memory, more than 10 years ago, 1 piece of Xian money could buy 1 mantu, but now it has risen to 5 pieces. It is not that the price of mantu has risen, but that Xian money has been cast privately and randomly, and gradually becomes worthless. This also directly affected him as the lowest-ranking official, because the silver money he issued has always been settled according to the declared money. Although it has symbolically increased in recent years, the decline in value compared to the declared money cannot be compensated for. The missing part in between has fallen into the hands of someone unknown. Soon, Chen Mu returned to his home in this world. That is a row of somewhat dilapidated tiled and wooden houses located on the outskirts of Nanqing district, which can be considered as a slum area. It is said to be a row, but in reality, there are only 2 rooms in total. One firewood room is used to light a fire, cook, and pile up debris, while the other bedroom is used for living. Chapter 2. Knife Techniques. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. The 2 dilapidated wooden doors, clearly marked by the passage of time, were locked inside. Chen Mu knocked on the door and said, "I'm back," only then did he hear the sound of movement and joy coming from inside. Gudong gudong. The sound was like running barefoot, approaching all the way, and then the door latch was pulled open. "Brother." A little girl wearing a coarse cloth floral jacket, standing only up to Chen Mu's chest, stood barefoot on the ground, looking up at Chen Mu with a cute smile. Chen Yu is already 14 years old this year, and for most girls, she should have reached the age of budding. However, she has been suffering from malnutrition since childhood and still looks thin and weak. Unlike a 14-year-old girl, her skin color is also a bit yellowish. In this world, it is obviously impossible for ordinary families to raise any peerless beauty. However, in Chen Mu's opinion, Chen Yu's foundation is quite good. If she can become more prosperous and raise her well in the future, she may also become a clean lotus flower, but now she can only live a difficult life with him. "Why are you running barefoot again?" Chen Mu rubbed the girl's little head with some indulgence. He had no sister in his past life, and now he has a cute and obedient sister here, which can be considered as the only comfort he can have in this chaotic and cold city. Chen Yu looked up and smiled, saying, "It's a pity to wear it when you go out, but if you wear it too much at home, it will wear out." Chen Mu picked up Chen Yu and placed her on the Kong in the inner room. He reached out and touched her small feet, feeling their tentacles cold. He couldn't help but blame them and say, "It's about to enter winter. What should I do if I get frostbite? If I wear it out, I'll just patch it up." He did know the reason why Chen Yu was reluctant to wear it. It was because the previous pair was completely broken, and her feet had grown a bit, so even Xiao couldn't fit it anymore. So Chen Mu bought her a new pair. The little girl was overjoyed and regarded it as a treasure. She was reluctant to wear it day by day, and anyway, she stayed at home and didn't go out. Okay. Chen Mu's answer was somewhat conflicted. If you really freeze your feet and still need to buy medicine, then you have to spend money in vain. Chen Mu handed mantu to her and asked her to wash her hands before eating. But the little girl had to run barefoot to wash her hands. Chen Mu simply brought the wooden basin over. Chen Yu washed her hands and feet. She took the mantu with a red face and ate it. Her eyes were full of love. Chen Mu had not been so good to her before. After a serious illness, she suddenly became better and better. Although she was her only brother, no matter what she did to her, she certainly liked her life now. Even if she stayed at home every day and could not go out, eating the most common white rice mantu, she was still happy. It's been a long time since I took you out to play, right? Chen Mu looked at Chen Yu's expression and thought for a moment before saying. Since he came to this world and discovered the chaos and danger outside, he strictly ordered Chen Yu not to run out, and even threatened her not to run out if she dared. The little girl cried for a long time in fear, and finally managed to calm her down. It's been 4 months now. Chen Yu ate mantu and said with fingers. Chen Mu smiled slightly and said, okay, I'll take you out to play again in a while. He couldn't bear to keep this young girl at home all this time, and taking her out was not entirely unacceptable. He always had to leave her face in a messy hair, and worn-out clothes, and then carry them on his own, preferably with a few familiar colleagues such as Lu San and Li Lu. That's how he took her out last time. Although there is still a bit of risk, staying at home all the time is no different from going to jail. Okay. Chen Yu listened to Chen Mu's words and indeed showed a surprised expression. But after the surprise, he looked carefully at Chen Mu and hesitated, saying, if I go out to play, will it cause trouble for my brother? Chen Mu rubbed her little head but didn't answer, saying, once you're done eating, stay inside. I'll go to the woodshed. Good. Chen Yu nodded obediently. The firewood room is very spacious. Because there was hardly any dry firewood, only a few scattered piles were piled up, and firewood has gradually become more expensive these years. It is said that a group of woodcutters who were chopping firewood have disappeared in the mountains west of the city, which scared many other woodcutters who were also afraid to go. Now only some bold individuals who take advantage of the increase in firewood prices and want to take risks to earn more are leaving the city to cut firewood and carry firewood, so the sources have become fewer. Ordinary families also save when they can. Chen Mu carefully took out the booklet he had previously touched from his pocket. The cover of the booklet is a bit tattered, and only the 3 characters Wind Blade Technique can be clearly seen. The person at the front, Chen Mu, carefully recognized it for a while and thought it should be a crazy character. When combined, it should be called Wind Blade Technique. A knife technique. Chen Mu looked at the knife technique in his hand and fell into contemplation. In fact, there is no such story in this world where one can practice and become a master behind closed doors by obtaining a move secret book. Even such old and dilapidated secret books are not very valuable to take out. The reason is also very simple. If you want to practice kung fu, whether it's fist, palm, leg, finger, or knife, gun, stick, or stick, you must have a real trainer to guide you. If you just play a secret book, you want to practice it yourself. If you hurt your muscles, and bones, no one is responsible. As a poor person, Chen Mu actually practiced swordsmanship at the city guard department. But the head of the city guard only teaches basic skills in horizontal and vertical slashing, and does not teach advanced knife techniques. Therefore, after Chen Mu came to this world, he practiced for 2.5 years, but at most, he was only able to deal with some ordinary people who did not know proper techniques. Chen Mu once asked Lu Song, Li Tai, and others, and the answer was the same. It's not difficult or expensive to get a knife technique secret book. In a pawn shop, you can usually buy it for 10 or so taels of silver. However, If you only rely on one secret book and rely on the fixed move patterns above to practice it, it's just a pipe dream. You must go to the martial arts school in the inner city, under the guidance of the martial arts master, and put on various forms of strength, which is the proper way. But the problem is the silver money collected by the martial arts school is not usually expensive. Moving costs tens to hundreds of taels of silver, and various medicine powders that have been damaged by injuries have to be paid for at one's own expense. As the saying goes, being poor in literature and rich in martial arts, even Lu Song and Li Tai, who have a decent family background, cannot afford to spend money to practice martial arts in the inner city. Not to mention him, he is now carrying only 2 taels of silver and cannot afford it. Did you sell it at the pawn shop? I estimate you can exchange it for 2 or 3 taels of silver, which can be considered a windfall. Chen Mu pondered in his heart. But there is also some unwillingness. In this chaotic world, any intelligence or talent is meaningless. Playing with intelligence may actually cost one's own life. Only by being cautious can one survive. However, he has no money and no power. If he wants to break away from the bottom, there is almost no hope. If one can master a swordsmanship and wield force, it would be completely different. Not only are those rural gentry and powerful people willing to hire them as guards, but they can also hold a high position in the gang. Even in the city guard, there is a chance to be appreciated by the upper echelons, rising from being a lower-level official to being a lower-level official. The difference between a police officer and a police officer is that, strictly speaking, a police officer is not an official at all, but is only hired by the government to be responsible for daily patrols. However, a police officer is a different concept. The chieftains promoted by the various city guards in various regions belong to the true officials, and can even be considered as 9th-grade small officials. They are vastly different from ordinary commoners and have a completely different status from the chieftains. Some weaker gang forces even offer some silver to maintain relationships with the chieftains, in order to avoid them from getting into trouble. Let's give it a try. After thinking for a moment, Chen Mu still opened the booklet in front of him. Anyway, if you don't practice this kind of knife technique well, you'll only strain your muscles and muscles. After a few days of rest, you'll be able to recover. There won't be too many mistakes. If it's really not possible, just jot down the content and sell it to a pawn shop for silver. The Mad Wind Saber technique belongs to the Xuanfeng branch of the 8 branches of heaven, earth, and earth. Its form is chaotic and its intention is not chaotic. When 1,000 winds pass by, it wraps around the tendons and scrapes the bones. If one can cultivate it to perfection, they can develop a strand of mad wind sword technique. There is no picture on the first page of the secret script, only a paragraph describing it. Chen Mu thoughtfully turned to the next page and saw a figure standing with a knife leaping onto the yellow paper. The knife in his hand was guided by a dotted line, seeming to be crooked and slanted from bottom to top. The small characters at the bottom described it as Chaofeng first style. Chen Mu carefully studied for a moment, then stood up and drew his own sword. Following the description in the picture, he swung a sword. He practiced horizontal and vertical chops for 2 years, and when he swung the knife, it looked decent, but he felt it was very strange, and his strength was not even as strong as his usual pure horizontal and vertical chops. Sure enough, what Li Tai and his team said is good. With just one classic book, they can only practice postures at most, but the specific way to exert force and how to change and transform it is too difficult to figure out without a consistent line of martial artists' hand-to-hand guidance. Chen Mu sighed inwardly. Although it was very difficult, since he decided to try, he didn't want to give up just by starting. Chen Mu continued to flip back and saw 3 consecutive pages, each of which was a follow-up change to the first style of the chaotic wind. There were 3 types of changes, including diagonal, horizontal, and forward cuts, depending on the opponent's different coping methods. After memorizing several changes one by one, Chen Mu began to follow suit and practice. After practicing for a while, he also completed these movements preliminarily. He only slightly explored how to exert his strength, and was not sure if it contradicted the proper approach. In this way, he practiced the first move and the 3 changes in a confused way for half a day, but later he vaguely felt that he didn't seem to be as good as his usual horizontal and vertical free hand skills. If he used this half-hearted technique in battles, he might not only lose an advantage, but also suffer from others' big losses. It should still be a matter of exerting force and direction. There isn't much information in just one page of the booklet. Chen Mu pondered deeply in his heart. After this training, he was also certain that he was not the kind of martial arts genius who could easily understand all the key points of a set of moves with just a few maps, and could directly practice them out of thin air. If the rest of the moves are also like this, even if you have barely practiced them at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, it won't be much different from ordinary horizontal and vertical chops. This knife technique may just be for 2 taels of silver to buy meat and eat. Brother, drink water. Just as Chen Mu stopped practicing inside, a voice came from the side. Chen Yu tiptoed over wearing a pair of clean floral shoes, holding a rough pottery jar filled with some clean water. She looked up at her cute little face and said, "It's boiling." Chen Mu smiled gently and reached out to take the pottery jar. He had warned Chen Yu several times that water should not be drunk indiscriminately, it should be boiled away before it can be used. In this backward world, the length of life is directly related to eating and drinking indiscriminately. He took a few sips of the pottery jar, handed it back, and touched the little girl's head. "Is brother practicing kung fu?" Chen Yu asked curiously when she saw the booklet and the pattern of Chen Mu's moves placed on the stove. Chen Mu nodded. "I thought it might be an opportunity to change my destiny, but now it seems a bit optimistic. To truly practice martial arts, I may still need to accumulate some silver money, raise more, and then go to the martial arts school in the inner city to apprentice and learn." However, just as Chen Mu was about to put away the booklet, he suddenly froze. In his sight, at some point, a few floating words appeared in mid-air. He blinked blankly, but the words did not disappear, just floating in front of him. Martial arts. Gale blade technique, beginner, experience. 2 points after confirming that this was not his illusion, Chen Mu finally smiled on his face. Chapter 3. Introduction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Mu has always believed that everything has a causal conclusion. I came into this world and became a lowly servant, guarding my 7-year younger sister and living a difficult life. For over 2 years, except for the small salary that was deducted from her head, I did not make any windfall. The accumulated misfortune over the years finally brought him a harvest, allowing him to touch a sword technique classic and then obtain a small modifier that can improve his martial arts skills. Well, it should be possible to increase it by consuming experience points, but currently the experience points may not be enough. Chen Mu studied for a while and roughly understood the function of this thing. He only needs to practice the wind sword technique, even if no one guides him or practices incorrectly, but as long as he practices, he can gain experience, and then accumulate experience, which can directly improve the level of the wind sword technique. That is to say, even without the guidance of a martial artist and practicing in isolation, he can slowly hone this skill to perfection. Brother. Chen Yu looked at Chen Mu in confusion on the side. She looked at Chen Mu for some reason, suddenly waving at the empty front, then pondering and laughing, making her feel a bit scared. "Oh, I'm fine, I just thought of something." Chen Mu looked at Chen Yu and smiled, then couldn't help but reach out and vigorously rub her face, saying, maybe we won't have to live a difficult life for long." Chen Yu looked at Chen Mu with big eyes open, blinking twice, not quite understanding where Chen Mu's confidence came from. "Okay." But she still smiled and agreed. Whether life is tough or not is actually not a big deal. She thinks everything is okay. As long as Chen Mu can be safe and sound, his parents are gone. She is a hint of comfort in Chen Mu's heart, and Chen Mu is not her only shining light. After asking Chen Yu to return to the bedroom, Chen Mu picked up the poor knife and started practicing again. However, compared to various hesitant attempts before, there was no longer any delay in practicing the knife this time, and he didn't care whether the strength was right or not. In short, he practiced according to the moves. After practicing for a period of time, Chen Mu indeed saw the words, experience +1, appearing in his sight. Very good. Chen Mu smiled, everything was basically consistent with his judgment. I just don't know how much experience I need to accumulate to upgrade the wind sword technique from an beginner level, but as long as it can be effective, over time, there will always be a day when I can practice this technique, unlike before when there was no direction at all. Life passes quickly. In a blink of an eye, it will take 7 days. During these 7 days, Chen Mu spent most of his time practicing the wind sword technique, except for his regular duty at the city guard and patrolling in teams with Lu Song and others. The experience gained from the wind blade technique is not easy either. It can be said that almost every point of experience is obtained through sweat. He has to practice hard for almost an hour to obtain 2 or 3 points of experience. But no matter how slow it is, this is still a solid experience value, rather than an aimless practice. Finally, on this afternoon, Chen Mu, who had been sweating profusely, accumulated a whole 100 points of experience in the wind sword technique. Martial Arts. Gale Blade Technique, Beginner/Plus, Experience. 100 points. There was indeed a change on the modifier, with a plus symbol appearing behind the inexperienced knife technique. Chen Mu took a deep breath, looked solemnly at the interface, and then moved his mind and clicked towards the plus. Buzz. A dim golden light flashed by. Martial Arts. Gale Blade Technique, Beginner, Experience. 0 points. With the changes in the interface, Chen Mu suddenly felt a massive amount of information pouring into his mind. The original Wild Wind Saber technique, which had no idea how to exert force or the direction of each move, was corrected one move at a time in these pieces of information. It's like following the most correct practice route and practicing hard for several months. When all changes disappear, Chen Mu took a deep breath, grabbed his poor sword, and suddenly had a completely different feeling. The 12 forms of the wind sword technique, each form, and all the changes, were all familiar to his heart at this moment. How to exert force, how to change, everything becomes clear, unlike before when I knew nothing. I'm getting started. With just a gentle tap, I'm afraid it's comparable to someone else's 1 or 2 months of hard training in a martial arts school under the guidance of a martial arts master. But I actually practiced hard for 7 days. Chen Mu murmured in his heart and then swung his knife forward, using the first move of the chaotic wind. This time he used it, it was completely different from before. The originally strange moves suddenly became extremely refined, such as leg stretching, abdominal tightening, and oblique thrusting. With this strike, it brought a gust of wind. Indeed, it is completely different from ordinary Sanzhou. Chen Mu nodded to himself. Just this knife start move, when all parts of the body are at their standard, its power is already stronger than the horizontal and vertical slashes he has practiced before in Sanzhou. Not to mention, there are several changes after this move, and after the changes, it can further connect with subsequent moves. Unlike ordinary Sanzhou, after a knife strike, he can only rely on pure strength to randomly chop and attack. According to the description in the wind sword technique, this sword technique is divided into beginner level, minor achievement, major achievement, and perfection. According to the correct path of cultivation, the average number of people can enter the level in a month, with a small success in 1 or 2 years. At this time, wielding a sword can defeat 2 or 3 armed bandits who do not know martial arts, and a large success can be achieved in 5 or 6 years. Often, even 5 or 6 opponents are difficult to get close to. As for perfection, this step is extremely difficult, requiring mastery of the true mystery of the fierce wind and the cultivation of the sword technique. Once mastered, one will be at least 10 enemies. Participating in the martial arts examination to obtain the title of martial student is basically effortless. Nowadays, the government is corrupt and the world is chaotic. The literary examination system is already in name only, not to mention the lower-level children and scholars. Even if they reach the level of Juren, they are basically reduced to silver transactions, and they have no power, and cannot reach the level of Juren. Compared to that, martial arts exams are different because they control the use of force, so even if the quotas are controlled by aristocratic families and clans, as long as they have the strength at that level, they can still be promoted and even won over by all parties. If one can pass the exam as a martial arts student, they are basically guaranteed to be promoted to the position of poor leader. Even if they cannot pass the exam, as long as they demonstrate their strength at that level, they can still be promoted to the position of poor leader. Chen Mu pondered in his heart. If external skills such as the wind sword technique can be practiced to a great extent, there is basically hope to become a servant. As long as the position is vacant or appreciated by the superiors, one can basically rise to the top. Even if one doesn't have enough experience, there is still a chance to sit up. If one can practice to perfection and develop a sword technique, then being a poor leader is a dead end, because as far as he knows, even among the many poor leaders, there are very few who can develop a sword technique or sword technique into a momentum. It should be noted that people who have reached this level were able to easily obtain the title of Wusheng through the orthodox martial arts examination in the past hundreds of years, and directly enter the ranks of the imperial court. Nowadays, it is just a collapse of the official system, and the civil and military court examination has been in existence or even non-existent, leading to more official sales and titles. The path of promotion in the orthodox court has basically been abandoned. To achieve great mastery in a sword technique, a person with average talent and intelligence can achieve it even after more than 10 years of hard practice. However, if one wants to develop usher, they are unparalleled. A few days ago, Chen Mu had a casual conversation with several of his close associates in the city guard department. He learned that among the 5 leaders in the current city guard department, only one of them was a practitioner of power, and he became a leader based on his strength. Among the other 4, Xiao Zong, the oldest of them, is even over 60 years old. He has practiced swordsmanship all his life but has not been able to comprehend the art of swordsmanship. The Zhao family is considered to have power and influence in the local area. If Xiao Zong can practice swordsmanship, he may have a chance to become an envoy. They couldn't realize that little spiritual light and stopped moving forward, but I was different. As long as I patiently practiced slowly, I would eventually achieve small success, great success, and perfection. I'm afraid it only takes me at most a year to reach perfection. A faint light flashed in Chen Mu's eyes. He has already started his swordsmanship, and if he wants to practice it to a small extent, he needs 300 experience. According to the previous practice, it will only take about a month. After that, he will achieve great success and perfection. Even if the required experience increases step by step, it should only be around a year. And once his swordsmanship is perfect and he practices his swordsmanship, whether it's taking a martial arts exam to achieve fame or quietly showing some strength in the city guard, he will be steadily promoted to the rank of poor leader, and his identity and status will be different from now. He has been in this world for over 2 years now. In this perilous bottom, he has lived cautiously for so long and doesn't care about enduring such days for another year. Moreover, compared to the days when there was no hope before, the feeling of having a goal is completely different. Chapter 4. Imprisonment. You are listening at novel full.audio. Day by day passed. It will be 2 months soon. Chen Mu continued to follow the usual routine of patrolling and then went home to practice swordsmanship. The identity of a servant is still quite important to him. On the one hand, it is the only source of income, and on the other hand, having this level of identity is necessary to avoid trouble caused by local ruffians and even gang thugs. Resigning to practice swordsmanship is not feasible. This day, Chen Mu passed the patrol and returned home. Unexpectedly, besides Chen Yu, there was another person in the family. Third aunt. Why did you come? Chen Mu approached with some surprise and asked as he looked at a middle-aged woman with a worried expression on her face. His father is the eldest, with a younger brother and a younger sister, who are his second uncle and third aunt. His second uncle is usually uneducated and has been taught a lesson by his father, so he hardly interacts with him. He even didn't come when his father left. Sangu is actually closer and comes to visit as usual. After his father leaves, he occasionally comes to deliver some rice, noodles, and soybeans, so Chen Mu has always respected this Sangu Chen Hong. When he is not at home, only Chen Hong comes and Chen Yu opens the door. Xiao Mu. Sangu has no choice but to ask for your help. Chen Hong had a withered face, wrapped in a headscarf. As she pulled Chen Mu over, she couldn't help but cry. Upon careful inquiry, Chen Mu learned that it was Chen Hong's son, who was also his cousin Zhang Hai, who had an accident. Zhang Hai followed his second uncle and was also ignorant and idle, wandering around the streets and alleys all day. This time, he met a beautiful woman in the alley and couldn't help but flirt with her, which angered the other party. He was first beaten up, and then alarmed the city guard, who directly arrested him. Without further questioning, he was thrown into prison. Sangu, I have said before that in today's chaotic world, my cousin's temperament should also be restrained. How dare he act so recklessly? I'm afraid I won't be able to help with such things. After listening to Chen Hong's chatter, Chen Mu couldn't help but furrow his brow. Upon hearing this, it was obvious that Zhang Hai had a background in provoking trouble. He easily mobilized the city guard and even threw himself into prison, which at least had to be a close relationship. He was a servant who was usually cautious and not very petty. If he wanted to rescue people from prison, it was just a whim and did not have such a big face. Chen Hong sobbed and said, I know. The person Xiao Hai offended this time is said to be the fourth wife of the young master of the southern family in the city. I have already begged some people, but they are not willing to intercede. I just came here to ask Xiaomu to go to the prison to intercede, at least get through this situation. When they forget about this, they will find another way. While speaking, Chen Hong shook her hands and took out 2 silver coins from her arms, which looked about 20 taels. Chen Mu knew that the third aunt's family background was quite good. The third uncle's husband was engaged in a butcher's business, but 20 taels of silver was definitely not a small amount, and he probably spent a lot of money on it. Watching Chen Hong's tearful eyes dance, Chen Mu thought of the rice and noodles he had brought in the past and sighed in his heart. In the end, he took the silver and said, I can only try to ask, but there is no guarantee of success or failure. This silver is not given to him, or rather, he doesn't have such a big face. Let the prison warden show mercy to Zhang Hai, and he can only hand over these 20 taels of silver to the prison warden to see if he is willing. The prison leader and jailer are also under the jurisdiction of the city guard department and are also one of the 3 groups of people. However, there is not much interaction on weekdays. Moreover, in this world, there are hardly any living people who have been imprisoned, and there is no need to deliberately stir things up. All you need to do is not send food or water, and the people will be gone in a few days. Prisoners are not beneficial, and they basically won't go to deliver food or water. Chen Hong wants Zhang Hai to stay in prison for a few months. It may not be easy to get through this matter, but he cannot persuade anything because Chen Hong only has Zhang Hai as his son. Thank you very much, thank you very much. Chen Hong trembled in response, unable to even speak for a moment, sitting there slumped in tears. Chen Mu let out a faint sigh in his heart. If he had already done something wrong by now, it would be much easier to do. At least he could ask a prison warden about the specific situation, but now his swordsmanship is only a small achievement, and he can't even become a bad leader. It should have been Zhang Hai who had this misfortune. He was usually ignorant and unable to control his own mouth. Fortunately, he only spoke rudely and never made any moves, otherwise he would have been a dead person by now. Usher, please accompany my third aunt and I'll go out for a trip. Chen Mu said a word to Chen Yu next to him, and then took advantage of the early weather to leave the house again. The prison in Nanqing district is located behind the Nanqing City Guard headquarters. Usually, Chen Mu rarely comes here. Although he is also a staff member of the City Guard Department, he belongs to the City Guard Department of Jushiali in Nanqing district and does not work in the City Guard Department. Moreover, the City Guard Department and Jushiali City Guard Department are relatively far away. Compared to the Jushiali City Guard Department, the City Guard General Department is much stricter. On weekdays, the Jushiali City Guard Department even has servants who have nothing to do but fight dice and gamble a few big money, but the General Department cannot see it. It is said that the chief envoy of Nanqing district is a woman with a sinking fish and falling geese appearance, which I have never seen before. After Chen Mu walked into the general office of the City Guard, he glanced at the towering tower in the center. He had been in this world for 2 years, and he had only seen the deputy of the 9-mile City Guard a few times, let alone the superior general deputy. The spacious City Guard general occasionally had servants walking around, but most of them were walking with their heads down, with a solemn expression, not whispering or looking around. Chen Mu also lowered his head slightly and quietly bypassed the front half of the headquarters to reach the prison located in the rear. Once in prison, the atmosphere changed again. In the room next to the prison, several guards were gathered together, fighting dice. Compared to the solemn and dignified City Guard General, this prison is actually much more leisurely, and no one comes in on weekdays. "Hey buddy, what's up?" A prison guard looked up at Chen Mu's official attire and said. Chen Mu ignored the gambling of several people and said, "I'll find the prison guard." "Oh, Wei too is inside." The prison guard pointed in one direction inside. Chen Mu thanked him, but the other party waved their hand indifferently, and then continued to fight dice with their colleagues. Walking down the hallway and passing through a few steps, Chen Mu arrived at a relatively clean and tidy room. However, there were several rows of shelves filled with various torture tools, which looked somewhat intimidating. Guantou Weinan sat on a chair with his eyes closed to rest. When he heard someone come in, he opened a gap. "Lord Wei." Chen Mu bowed to the prison head. The position of a prison leader is basically equivalent to that of a poor leader, and also belongs to his superior. Wei Nan responded casually when he saw Chen Mu dressed as a servant. Chen Mu walked forward and talked about Zhang Hai's situation, then handed over the 20 taels of silver given by Chen Hong. "Oh." Wei Nan took the silver and casually weighed it for a few moments. After thinking for a moment, he put it into his sleeve and said, "Someone has said to him that he will suffer on this sea head, but if his family is so sensible, they will keep his daily food and water. However, I cannot guarantee how he will be in a month or 2. In recent years, the world has been chaotic. Any major thieves caught outside are mostly killed on the spot, and very few will be sent to prison. Those who are locked up in prison are those from good families outside and constantly giving money. As a prison warden, I can't compare to the poor guy walking outside, so I only point to this matter to make money. Just a word from you, that's all." Chen Mu smiled and said. If he hadn't come today, it wouldn't have been a problem for Zhang Hai to suffer a bit. If he were to use any torture equipment and starve for a few more days, he would have lost almost half of his life, and it's also possible for him to die. Although these 20 taels of silver cannot save people, at least they will not be short of food and water for the next 1 or 2 months. However, even if this trend passes, some Chen Hong's family will still worry about getting people out. It won't be so easy. People are inside, let Lu Si take you to take a look. After Wei Nan received the money, he waved his hand and seemed unwilling to talk to Chen Mu any longer. Chen Mu bowed and left. After arriving outside, he quickly found Lu Si. Lu Si didn't say anything and led him straight into the prison. After descending several steps, the environment immediately became dark and humid, and a foul and moldy smell filled the air, which was very uncomfortable. Here it is. Lu Si pointed to the fourth cell. In the first 3 cells, there were 3 men who were neither human nor ghost, as thin as a stick. When Lu Si and Chen Mu came in, they didn't speak or move much. If it weren't for their oily green eyes turning, they would be almost like dead people. In the fourth cell, there was a person lying in a pile of tattered straw, with a rather chubby figure and many bloodstains on his body. "Cousin." Chen Mu walked up and called out in a low voice. Zhang Hai, who was originally lying there motionless, finally shook his head and looked up at Chen Mu in a daze. He finally recognized the person and said weakly, "Yes. It's Chen Mu. Hurry up, help me out. San Gu asked me to bring you a few words." Chen Mu did not respond. He first delivered a few words that Chen Hong asked him to bring, and then explained the current situation. "Anyway, you can only be a little aggrieved here these days." After hearing this, Zhang Hai immediately showed a look of despair and said, You can't just face death without saving yourself. My family has sent you several rice noodles before, and I haven't stopped them any time. My mother was thinking of getting married to you a few days ago, but you can't do this." Chen Mu stopped talking. He actually doesn't have much interest in Zhang Hai. Even the former Chen Mu, he doesn't get along well with Zhang Hai in his memory. It seems that Zhang Hai doesn't look up to his cousin, Chen Mu, very much. Even if he becomes a servant later on, he probably feels like he is a lifelong poor servant, just like his father, and of no use. But when he thought of his third aunt Chen Hong, Chen Mu remained silent for a while before saying, "The person you offended has a reason behind it, and I have no other choice. So do my third aunt and uncle. You can only hold on to this moment, maybe you can wait for a turning point." Speaking. Chen Mu turned around and walked outside. Zhang Hai lay there with lifeless eyes, murmuring, "What's the use of sending them those rice noodles? Being a poor person these days is useless." Chen Mu's father worked as a poor person for a lifetime, and in the end, he was still a poor person. Even when he died, he didn't have the money to take care of his affairs. It was his mother Chen Hong who helped to do it. Her relatives on the other side were all poor and broke down, and they had already told her not to come and go. If we save more money and use it to manage, maybe we can save him. Chapter 5. Young Heroes. You are listening at novel full.audio. Leaving prison. Chen Mu hurried out. He doesn't really want to stay at the city guard headquarters much, the atmosphere here is really a bit oppressive. However, as Chen Mu circled back to the front courtyard and returned to the towering city guard tower, a corner of his eye caught a glimpse of a person wearing a white flying fish suit standing on the 4th floor of the tower. Although separated by some distance, it can still be recognized as a woman, and her appearance should be quite young. It is estimated that the legendary, sinking fish and falling geese, appearance, even if it is flattery, is not groundless. Is that the chief inspector of Nanqing district? Chen Mu quickly withdrew his gaze with just a glance of spare light. Among the 4 urban areas in the southeast, northwest, and northwest, only the chief inspector in the Nanqing district is a woman. However, no one dares to underestimate this chief inspector because of this. After all, the chief inspector may rise to power based on his connections, and the chief inspector may only be a half-hearted person. However, the Grand Chief Inspector in charge of the Nanqing District City Guard, relying solely on the power behind him, does not have the strength to do so, which is impossible. I couldn't help but think that in addition to various external skills such as swordsmanship, there are also rumored internal skills in this world. As far as he knows, the internal method does indeed exist, but regardless of the difficulty of cultivation or various needs, it is far higher than the external skill. Any medicine powder may cost tens of taels of silver. Practicing the internal method is almost like burning money, so it is not widely circulated. But true strength is also the existence of cultivating internal techniques. Even if external skills alone reach their peak, practicing a sword technique can reach 10 enemies, which is the limit. Practicing internal techniques, with long internal breathing and long physical strength, can even achieve 100 enemies, or even 1,000 enemies according to legend. This general commander must be a strong practitioner of internal techniques, but unfortunately, I cannot obtain the cultivation methods for internal techniques. Chen Mu shook his head. He doesn't pay much attention to the beauty of the appearance of the general assistant, only the internal training methods are what he cares about. I don't know if the system can also use experience to forcefully stack the cultivation of internal training methods. His thoughts were a bit drifting in his heart, but Chen Mu quickly regained his composure. He shouldn't have set his sights too high at the moment. He should first practice the Gale Blade technique to perfection, then try to further improve and gain a certain level of strength before attempting to seek internal training methods. Chen Mu quickly walked out of the city guard headquarters. Standing on the tower of the city guard building, the chief inspector Su Hongyu looked down at the entire city guard with a hint of worry in her eyes. Her gaze passed over Chen Mu's back without stopping, just like the servants who rushed by like flowing water on weekdays, and did not catch her attention. Chen Mu walked non-stop and hurried home all the way. Because the general secretary of the city guard is a bit far away from his home, and it's getting late at night. Even if he wears the clothes of a servant, it's still unsafe to walk at night. It's very likely that he will be caught in some trouble due to accidentally encountering something, and the next day he will become an unnoticed corpse in the roadside ditch. Chen Mu quickened his pace, and when he arrived home, the sky was still bright, while Chen Hong was already waiting for the day to pass like a year. Seeing Chen Mu finally coming back, he quickly welcomed him. San-gu. Chen Mu nodded at Chen Hong and said, "The silver prison has taken it. He said it won't be too troublesome for his cousin for 1 or 2 months, but after 1 or 2 months, we'll have to find another way." Upon hearing Chen Mu's words, Chen Hong finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, "That's good, that's good." She has been thinking about saving people these days, but she has encountered obstacles everywhere and can't find anyone to intercede with. Now, she takes a step back. Fortunately, she is in prison and easy to talk to. Finally, she can save Zhang Hai's life first. As for a month or 2 later, she can only take 1 step at a time. Chen Mu helped Chen Hong sit down. "Third aunt, don't worry too much about this matter. The boat will naturally straighten at the bridge, and perhaps there will be a turning point in a few days. In fact, if Zhang Hai can have an accident later, when he becomes the head of the bureau, he will naturally have some say in the matter. Even at his age, if he can develop a sword style, it is possible to directly enter the eyes of a person like the General Bureau. At that time, there was indeed a chance to rescue Zhang Hai from prison, but perhaps he had just hit the nail on the head. At the moment, he had no choice but to get involved, and he was even reluctant to get involved in it to avoid disrupting the planned plan. Chen Hong sat calm and composed. After all, it was because of his age, and upon learning that Zhang Hai was temporarily unharmed, he quickly recovered. "Well, we can only take 1 step at a time to see." Chen Hong also sighed and said, "I've spoiled him since I was young. Xiaomu, it's getting late. Why don't you and Yuer come to my house together and have a meal?" Chen Mu saw a hint of hope in Chen Yu's eyes, but he still shook his head and said, "No, it's getting late. After dinner, we'll have to stay overnight at San-gu's house. It's too troublesome." Chen Hong waved her hand and said, "No trouble, no trouble. You happen to come to my house." Speaking and speaking. Chen Hong suddenly paused for a moment, seeming to have thought of something, hesitated for a moment, and then continued, "Xiaomu, do you remember Yuying?" She was the daughter of Xiaohai's fourth uncle's family and came to your house when she was a child. Chen Mu was slightly confused. This memory is a bit distant, it was before he came to this world, but he still has all the previous memories, only slightly blurry. At this moment, hearing Chen Hong mention it, I searched around in my mind and finally found the figure of a little girl. I still have a little impression, what's wrong? Chen Mu asked. Chen Hong pondered for a moment and said, Ying, this child. Her father left last year and now lives with me. She has also reached her age, and you haven't started a family yet. I thought earlier that I might as well tell you about a marriage, do you think? Chen Yu listened on the side, blinking her eyes. Chen Mu originally wanted to refuse, but after some thought, he found some memories about Zhang Yuying. When she was a child, she seemed to be a pretty little girl. After a moment of thought, he said, I don't want to start a family for the past 2 years, and I haven't seen her for many years. I don't know what she looks like now. Chen Hong smiled and said, You're a big girl now, not worse than you were. It's better if you don't go today. I haven't told Ying about this yet. Let's talk about it when we go back. Speaking of which. Seeing that it was indeed getting late, Chen Hong stood up to bid farewell, while Chen Mu pulled Chen Yu to the door. Wait until Chen Hong's back disappears. Chen Yu then tilted her head to look at Chen Mu and said, Brother should also find a sister. In.Law. Chen Mu closed the door and reached out to touch her head. It's not urgent. In fact, nowadays is not the right time. When he practices his swordsmanship well and becomes the underdog, even if he has ideas at that time, it is not a big deal to carefully choose. But when he thinks about it, he will have a position and many people will follow suit. Now, it's not a big deal to take a look. Chen Yu whispered, when my brother has a sister. In.Law, he won't want me anymore. Chen Mu chuckled and said, How could I not want you? Yuer is the most important. Coaxing the little girl into the house, Chen Mu walked into the woodshed and continued practicing swordsmanship. The sky is dim. Chen Hong quickened her pace and quickly arrived at a spacious street and walked into a courtyard. The yard is not very large, it's just a small courtyard that you can enter. Apart from the main entrance, there are 3 rows of houses in a circle, with 4 rooms in each row. In total, there are 12 rooms. Although it looks a bit old, it is still relatively clean. Those who live in this kind of courtyard are generally not powerful families. It can only be said that compared to the poor and lower class, they are slightly richer. Generally speaking, they are living in a family of 4 or 5 people. As soon as Chen Hong entered the yard, a rather greasy middle-aged man walked over with a worried expression and asked, How's it going? He is Zhang Hai's father and also a well-known Zhang butcher in the street market. With his skills in slaughtering pigs and cutting bones and dividing meat, he is considered a family that does not worry about food and clothing. However, this time Zhang Hai had an accident, he was so worried that he had no way out. After all, he is just a butcher, at most only delivering meat to some masters, and getting to know some low-level people. If it really involves the matters of the city guard and the prison, there is no way at all. After all, gangsters and thieves, even some gang characters, cannot have the ability to extract people from the prison. As for some influential real masters, he is not qualified to plead with others. Sigh. Chen Hong sighed and followed Butcher Zhang into the house, then explained the situation. Upon hearing this, Butcher Zhang breathed a slight sigh of relief and then sighed, saying, Alas, your nephew has been working for so many years and really doesn't know any noble people. Can you help me express a few words of affection? When your elder brother was still here, I said not to let your nephew work as a servant. In this world, there is no family background, no money or power, and working as a servant can't earn any money, let alone advance. It's better to go to those gangs and fight hard, maybe even get a nod. Chen Hong wiped her tears and said, being a servant is always a matter of stability. If you don't ask for much silver, it will be safe and sound. Besides, without Xiao Mu, even if you have silver, you won't be able to deliver it to the prison. Butcher Zhang shook his head and said, well, let's not talk anymore. Let's go call Yuying to come and eat. Before Chen Hong could walk out, she saw a young girl about 16 or 17 years old walking in. She was quite handsome and had a tear mole under her eye. As soon as she entered the room, she asked, Auntie, you're back. How's Brother Hai doing? Chen Hong talked about Zhang Hai's situation again. At least it's okay for now, said Zhang Yuying as she sat on the side listening. At the bottom of my heart, there is still half a sentence that hasn't been spoken. My cousin Zhang Hai's flesh, this time coming out of prison, may still be a good thing. He can lose weight, so he can't say such insignificant things. At the same time, she also shook her head secretly. She had long thought that Zhang Hai, who was so ignorant and inexperienced, would eventually have an accident. She had previously kindly reminded Zhang Hai once, but Zhang Hai did not listen to her words and gave up. However, she did not expect the incident to happen so suddenly. Fortunately, it didn't involve her family or her. Chen Hong sat there mourning for Zhang Hai's situation for a while, until Zhang Yuying brought the food to the table. It was then that she regained her composure and remembered something. She asked Zhang Yuying, you and Xiao Mu haven't seen each other for many years, haven't you? Zhang Yuying pondered for a moment and remembered the appearance of a young boy, but it was Chen Mu from her childhood. Although she had never seen him again since then, she could barely imagine what he would look like when he grew up, which should be more enduring than Zhang Hai. She looked for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, but it seemed that she was not very intelligent. At that time, she asked the other person about chicken and duck counting, but she couldn't answer them at all. Chen Hong suddenly mentioned Chen Mu, and she immediately thought of Chen Hong's plan. So he didn't speak, just watching Chen Hong wait for the next message. Sure enough, Chen Hong said later, Xiao Mu is still a very good child. Although our family is a bit poor, we have a stable life in the face of poverty. It happens that you are also in your prime. Let me see. Auntie, I'm not ready to get married yet. Zhang Yuying blushed slightly and said, and I know some math and calculation skills. I think it would be best to manage accounts in the future. As a messenger, Brother Mu probably doesn't need someone to manage accounts. Although she doesn't leave home, she still has some understanding of the outside world, such as the lower class. If the family has power and can spend money to establish relationships and gradually rise to power, or go to the inner city to learn martial arts and develop skills, but if there is nothing, there is basically no chance of making a name for herself, and the salary and money can only make a living. She knows some writing and math skills, and she has a beautiful appearance. Even if she doesn't marry a powerful family, she must at least marry a restaurant owner, pawn shop owner, or something like that. She only writes and calculates accounts on a daily basis. It's better not to engage in intimate relationships. Upon hearing this, Chen Hong immediately felt a bit embarrassed. Zhang, the butcher, shook his head and said, Yuying, this child's ability in writing, ink, and math is quite good. She has never made any mistakes in calculating the accounts for selling meat to me. What can she do after marrying your nephew? You better not worry about those idle matters. I will help you see if there is a suitable family one day, and you cannot mistreat her. Zhang Yuying obediently lowered her head and remained silent. Upon seeing this, Chen Hong could only sigh helplessly and let it go for the time being. Chapter 6. City Guard Department. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. The sky is hazy and bright. Chai Fang. Chen Mu flipped a knife up and down, creating a gust of whistling wind. I don't know how long he practiced until the prompt, Experience +1, popped up on the system panel, and then he stopped, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and showed a slight smile. It has been a month since Zhang Hai had an accident. During this month, Butcher Zhang and Chen Hong have been trying their best to rescue Zhang Hai, but there has been no movement. The person has still been imprisoned, but it is still okay for the time being. As for the matter of the Yuying sister mentioned by Chen Hong, it was never mentioned again afterwards, and Chen Mu did not ask. It is estimated that either the butcher Zhang obstructed or the others did not have much regard for him, and he did not have any displeasure about it. After all, he was only a low-level servant, and it was normal not to look down on him. Although he has embarked on the right path now, he has not yet made a name for himself, let alone to the extent that even the Heavenly King and Laozi have to look up to him. Everyone has their own aspirations and does not insist. In short, after nearly a month of practicing swordsmanship and accumulating experience points, I have finally accumulated 1,000 points so far. The wind blade technique has been upgraded to an entry-level, consuming 100 experience points. However, from entry-level to minor level, it costs 300 points. As for minor level to major level, it requires a full 1,000 points, which also took him nearly 2 months of hard cultivation. In fact, I am now on the right path to practice swordsmanship. Even if there is no one to guide me, I know how to practice. As long as I have time to hone it, even without a system, I can gradually achieve great success, but... Chen Mu shook his head. He can actually save some experience points and try to reuse them later, but he still doesn't plan on doing so. On the one hand, relying solely on his daily practice of swordsmanship, it would take at least several years to reach the pinnacle of the wind blade technique. The span is too long, and on the other hand, he now needs his strength to be close to him. In this chaotic world, Xiaocheng's gale blade technique doesn't have much confidence, but once it reaches to Sheng, it can at least cope with the siege of 5 or 6 armed bandits. Even the most dangerous night patrols can have more confidence. After all, many bad guys, including thugs in some gangs, and even the guards hired by wealthy families, often have a certain level of skill in boxing, footwork, swordsmanship. Those who truly practice their skills are quite influential and skilled. Take a deep breath. Chen Mu's mind moved and he exhausted his accumulated 1,000 points of experience. Buzz. In an instant, the entire brain went blank. From beginner to novice, he was instilled with the memory of practicing the wind sword technique for at least one spring and autumn. This time, from novice to novice, he went through the ups and downs of spring, summer, autumn, winter, and cold and heat for several years. It felt like being there, practicing day and day, practicing month and month, practicing swords in the spring breeze, practicing swords under the summer sun, practicing swords on the autumn frost, practicing swords in the winter snow. Spring and autumn repeated, years passed in a flash. By the time Chen Mu's consciousness had completely regained consciousness, his entire spine had already been soaked in sweat, to the point where he didn't even know how long he had been standing there in a daze. But when he clenched the knife in his hand again, a feeling like an arm's finger suddenly arose. Beginner-level knife technique, simply mastering the direction and details of the force and mastering the basic moves. If the knife technique is successful, you will master all the moves and subsequent changes, and can adapt to the situation in actual combat. Various moves can be used in a coherent manner, making you a practitioner on the right path. And the knife technique has been greatly improved. This is a complete mastery of the art of the wind sword technique, which is no longer limited to moves and changes. With the ability to draw inferences from moves themselves, it is flexible and versatile. Whether it is 1.1, one-to-many, or against different types of opponents such as fists, feet, swords, etc., it can all be skillfully dealt with, making it a truly powerful and skilled player. Once unleashed, 2 or 3 armed bandits would be directly killed by him, making it difficult for 5 or 6 bandits to get close. I finally have some strength. Chen Mu felt the power he possessed at this moment and couldn't help but smile a bit. Strength is the foundation for walking in chaotic times. With this ability, one can say that they can handle many situations. Even if they lose their status as a servant now, they don't have to worry about those hooligans, thugs, and even gang thugs causing trouble. At this level, one is also fully capable of working as a thug in some factions or as a guardian for others to earn some silver money. Of course, Chen Mu will not be complacent due to this small achievement. He has achieved great swordsmanship and only has a little self-protection ability. He has some survival skills based on his own abilities, but if he wants to completely change his status, he cannot do it. Unless the wild wind saber technique is practiced to a perfect level, and no one in 100 martial arts practitioners can comprehend the momentum that is considered fundamental. Whether it is to go further and make mistakes, or to break away from the city guard and venture on their own, they all have the ability. Chen Mu took a few more breaths, then took out a portion of dried meat from under the stove, chewed it, and swallowed the water. He also counted his savings in the past 3 months. I took out all the little silver money I had barely accumulated over the past 2 years and bought meat. After all, practicing swordsmanship is tiring, not only to gain experience points, but also to exercise my physical fitness. I must absorb more nutrients. And the effect of this is also significant. At least under Chen Mu's clothes, after more than 3 months of hard training and occasional supplementation of meat, the entire contour has widened in a circle. Although it has not yet transformed into the image of protruding muscles and muscles, at least it is no longer as thin and weak as before. It's just that the hard-earned silver has basically been used up. Chen Mu is currently thinking about finding a time to take the Wind Sword Technique book to the pawn shop and sell it. Anyway, he has memorized the manual clearly and it has no value anymore. He was also considering buying a few more martial arts classics from the pawn shop if he had the opportunity, to see if the system could read them all for him. Unfortunately, although this thing is not very valuable, if he wants to buy it, he would have to start with at least 10 taels of silver, and he can't afford it now. And if you sell it, you can only sell 2 or 3 taels of silver, which can only be said that the hearts of pawn shops are not ordinary black. Alright, it should be getting late. Let's go to the city guard department first. Chen Mu thought about it for a while, but first he put away the booklet of the wind saber technique, cut some of the remaining dried meat, hid the rest, opened the pot, loaded congee rice, and went to the back room to call Chen Yu to eat. He eats meat, so naturally he can't let his sister go hungry, but he can't provide too much. It's not yet time, so the siblings can only save it. In a while, there will be no need to consider such things again. Chen Yu woke up from a hazy sleep, stretched out a little lazily, and then opened her arms to be hugged by Chen Mu. However, as she grew older, although she was poor and lacked nutrition, her body gradually developed, and Chen Mu rarely made too intimate gestures. However, Chen Yu persisted and eventually reluctantly hugged her, letting her eat well. Afterwards, then he changed into his official uniform, stepped on his official knife, and walked out the door. Chen Yu tied the door behind it and watched Chen Mu's figure disappear through the crack in the door before reluctantly slipping back into the room. The Yucheng where Chen Mu is located is actually quite large, not only divided into 2 cities. The inner and outer. The outer city is also divided into 4 parts. Southeast, northwest, and each part is divided into 10 li. The size of each li is not much different from that of a township outside the city, but it is called li inside the city and called xiang outside. Therefore, in addition to the 4 city guard generals, in the southeast, northwest, and northwest, each neighborhood also has a city guard branch, which is managed by a subordinate and has several subordinate leaders and dozens of subordinates. The place where Chen Mu is located is Jushiali, which belongs to the Jushiali city guard. Nowadays, the governance of officials is corrupt and chaotic, and the city guard has almost become a private soldier of some forces in the inner city. They often do not care about the security of the city, unless there are orders from above, they will take action. Jushiali City Guard is located to the north of an open square. The square is a vegetable market in Jushiali, and during the day it can be considered bustling with people. In the past, there were occasional bandits who were sentenced to death by beheading here, but in recent years, it has become increasingly rare. Along the way to the north in the vegetable market, there is a row of high blue stone walls. There are some cracks on the walls of zhaozuiyuan.com, which gives a sense of disrepair. Compared to the General Secretary of the City Guard, it is obviously much more ordinary, but still more solemn than the homes of ordinary residents. The 9-mile city guard within the walls of the blue stone courtyard does not have many tall buildings, only some relatively clean houses. Chen Mu walked into the city guard and first went to change the duty card for today, which was sign in. Then he went to the yard behind the house to search for Lu Song, Li Tai, and others in the same class. However, as soon as I turned into the courtyard behind the house, I saw that today seemed a bit different. There were many poor people scattered here, drinking large bowls of bitter tea, but many gathered together, surrounding a young poor person in the middle, which was very lively. Chen Mu raised his eyebrows slightly. The young servant surrounded by the crowd is called Ren Yan, and he also knows him. However, he is not in the same group as him, so we don't have much contact on weekdays. However, he is 2 years younger than him and is the youngest servant here. Chen Er is here, come on, take a sip of tea and rest your feet first. Sitting under a huge locust tree, Lu Song and Li Tai immediately greeted Chen Mu with a smile when they saw him walking by. Chen Mu walked over and sat down next to the two of them. He then noticed that the attendants gathered next to Ren Yan were mostly young people here, such as Lu Song and Li Tai, who were older and around 40 years old, but did not get close. Chen Mu picked up his bowl and took a sip of bitter tea, then looked into the distance and said, "This is." Lu Song chuckled and said, "Ren Yan is blessed. His father accidentally met a noble person not long ago and established some connections. The day before yesterday, he arranged for Ren Yan to learn swordsmanship at the Kaishan Martial Arts School in the inner city. Now, all the young people in our department want to come along and see if they can also follow Ren Yan's advice." Chapter 7. Patrol. You are listening at novel full.audio. I see. Chen Mu showed a hint of confusion. In these days, whenever there is an opportunity for advancement, it can naturally attract people to compete for the top spot. Elderly servants like Lu Song and Li Tai may not be interested anymore, and their energy and stamina may decline. They don't think they can practice any more martial arts, but younger people naturally have dreams of soaring to the sky and achieving success. However, Chen Mu is not very interested in this. On the one hand, there is a systematic existence that even the most skilled martial artists cannot compare to. On the other hand, Ren Yan himself has just started learning. He has no ability to guide others. Even if he has truly learned some skills, whether he can teach others or not is another matter. Teaching others and practicing oneself are two different things. It is undoubtedly impossible to cultivate any martial arts skills by currying favor with Ren Yan and seeking his guidance. But in this world, there is always a glimmer of hope that some people flock to. Chen Er, at your age, if you have the opportunity to practice swordsmanship, maybe you can also practice something. We don't have many ideas at our age, why don't you go and take a look? Li Tai smiled and spoke to Chen Mu. Chen Mu shook his head and said, "Kung Fu is not so easy to learn. If you don't practice it well, it's no different from ordinary Sanzhou." In the past, he didn't really understand the true martial arts skills, but now he has become proficient in swordsmanship and still understands a lot. At least in the entry-level, the difference between him and the horizontal and vertical slashing Sanzhou is not very big. Even if he is a little stronger than Sanzhou, in real combat, the sword has no eyes, and life and death are still unpredictable. At least you need to practice until you reach a certain level. To achieve small success, it usually takes 1 or 2 years of hard work. If one's talent is slightly lacking, it can take several years. Although he is not sure about Ren Yan's talent, it is still quite distant to reach this point. Indeed, Kung Fu is not that easy to practice. Lu Song also smiled and said that he was old and knew some people who studied martial arts in the inner-city martial arts school. After practicing for a year or two, they did have some level of proficiency after coming out. However, there were also many people who were killed by indiscriminate knives, and the differences were not very significant. The conversation between the few was not loud and didn't stand out in the noisy corner of the yard. However, Ren Yen, who was surrounded by everyone and flattered, noticed Chen Mu's gaze when he entered the yard. Although it was a bit far apart and I couldn't hear exactly what Chen Mu, Lu Song, and others were saying, I could distinguish a few scattered words and mouth shapes, which immediately made me feel a bit unhappy. Chen Mu is the youngest among the city guards in Jushiali, except for him. However, several times he invited Chen Mu to drink with him, but Chen Mu refused. He never gave him face, which made him very unhappy and felt that Chen Mu was deceiving his young age. Nowadays, my family had good luck and had an opportunity to arrange for him to learn swordsmanship at the martial arts school. After the news spread, the servants in this courtyard were all trying to get close to him, flattering him. Even the older servants smiled more at him. Only Chen Mu didn't come as soon as he entered the courtyard, and there was not much respect in his eyes. At present, Ren Yen felt a wave of displeasure in his heart, but on the surface, he walked a few steps towards Chen Mu with a smile and said, Brother Chen said that practicing kung fu is not good, and it is no different from Sanzhou. I have only just learned it for a few days, why not ask Brother Chen for guidance? Chen Mu naturally had no interest in fighting with Ren Yen for anything, especially since Ren Yen was younger than him. For someone who had lived 2 generations, he was also considered a child. He shook his head and said, It's just a joke from an outsider. If Ren Yen brothers have this opportunity to practice a knife technique in the future, they will naturally rise to the top. This is like human language. Ren Yan's face improved a bit, and he nodded at Chen Mu before laughing and chatting with other messengers. In the future, he will learn the art of swordsmanship, rise to the top, and become a leading or even leading official. There is really no need to compete with Chen Mu as an ordinary servant. It is said that Chen Mu's family is still very poor, and he will not be on the same level as him in the future. There were many poor people in the courtyard who didn't talk much about the brief communication between Chen Mu and Ren Yen. Each person only smiled, and only some younger poor people secretly looked at Chen Mu, feeling that he didn't understand the timing and didn't take the opportunity to curry favor with Ren Yen. When Ren Yen rose up in the future and truly became a bad leader, how could he pay attention to them? But no one would remind Chen Mu of anything. Anyway, everyone has their own aspirations and is willing to work with those old servants for a lifetime, living at the bottom, and there's not much to say. Even Lu Song and Li Tai didn't say anything. However, both of them were slightly surprised because they were familiar with Chen Mu and knew that Chen Mu was always cautious in his daily work. However, they should have a certain ambition in their hearts. They didn't expect today to be so dull. Perhaps they had encountered something and suddenly realized that they were willing to live a normal life. Actually, it's also good. If they don't have much ambition, they won't take any risks. Even if these low-level servants are extremely poor, they can at least live a stable life without lacking food, which is a job that can be done until old age. Alright, it's time for the patrol officer to go, otherwise if Qin Tu sees him, he will be punished. Lu Song finished drinking bitter tea and stood up to greet Chen Mu and Li Tai. Okay. Chen Mu drank half of the tea, got up, and went out of the yard with Li Tai and Lu Song to patrol. With 3 people leading the way, the other servants in the yard quickly dispersed in 2s and 3s, but many of them shook their heads secretly as they looked at Chen Mu's departing figure. Jushiali is not small, the busiest street is also lined with restaurants and bustling crowds. The patrols of Chen Mu, Lu Song, Li Tai, and others are basically just patrolling around bustling and important streets, with the sole purpose of deterring some local ruffians and preventing them from causing trouble in the bustling restaurants and markets during the day. After all, many restaurants and markets not only offer silver to local gang forces every month, but also give silver to the city guard. They do not seek protection from the city guard, but at least they need to live up to their dignity. Of course, these silver coins cannot flow into the hands of Chen Mu, these low-level servants. Basically, they are all taken to the top by the undertakers, and then each of the undertakers is given a share. After a casual inspection, Lu Song somehow became interested and took Li Tai and Chen Mu to the restaurant for a drink. However, after being rejected by Chen Mu, he eventually switched to drinking tea. Although in today's world, it's not a big deal for a servant to go to a tavern and have a drink openly. Even if he's unlucky enough to be caught by the servant, he'll only scold him for a few words at most. It won't really matter, but Chen Mu has always been cautious in his actions. He would rather be patient than make mistakes, so as not to fall behind any tricks. After all, if he were really caught as a typical person and made a big fuss, there would be no reason. When Chen Mu said that, Li Tai also felt it was reasonable, and Lu Song didn't force it. The few of them came to the restaurant, and under the flattery of the waiter, they sat down by the window. Then they ordered a pot of tea and a plate of peanuts and fennel beans. While eating and chatting. But I heard a commotion outside. Chen Mu turned his head to look out the window and saw a group of people fighting not far away, causing passers-by to retreat one after another. One group of people was clearly defeated, being beaten and retreating step by step. Along with some street vendors who couldn't make ends meet, they also suffered in the chaos. It's unclear who was beaten or robbed, but in short, it's a chaotic scene. Despite this, whether it was Chen Mu, Lu Song, Li Tai, and others, the three attendants sat in the tavern and watched from a distance, but none of them stood up to take charge. They all drank tea and watched. This kind of thing is too common. Generally, as long as it does not involve roadside restaurants, markets, or pawn shops, and only involves fighting in the streets and alleys, it is basically ignored. Unless someone dies in broad daylight, the city guard may handle it. Moreover, whether it was Chen Mu or Lu Song and others, they all saw at a glance that the two groups fighting were gang forces, and the officers of the city guard would not interfere in such a struggle. I'm afraid the Black Snake Gang won't be able to do it anymore. Find Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Lu Song squinted his eyes as he watched the fight in the distance, identifying the identity of the group of people who were constantly retreating. Oh. How do we say that? Li Tai ate a fennel bean and looked over strangely, saying, the Black Snake Gang says there are over 100 people, and there are also a lot of skilled players in the gang. They have been thriving in the past year. Chen Mu also looked at Lu Song, waiting for the following text. He also knows about the Black Snake Gang, which is a relatively powerful gang among the 9. Even the street and alleys where he lives, as well as several neighboring ones, belong to the Black Snake Gang, and they come to collect the so-called security money every month. Of course, the Black Snake Gang does not come to demand him as a serious servant, and every time those gang members see him, they will nod. Hey, don't you know? The Black Snake Gang was in a big disaster not long ago. The leader of the gang was seriously injured, and several incense lords below died or were injured. Now, I'm afraid they won't last for a few days. Look at those relentless pursuers, I remember they were called the Qijin Gang. A few months ago, they were not well known, but now they are said to have annexed many territories of the Black Snake Gang. I don't think it will be long before they replace the entire Black Snake Gang. Lu Song chuckled and took a sip of tea, saying. Li Tai couldn't help but be slightly moved as he listened to Lu Song's words and said, so the Black Snake Gang is finished. The leader of the Black Snake Gang is a remarkable figure. I heard that one handgun technique is as ruthless and fierce as a venomous snake, and he is a person who has trained his gun skills. He once killed dozens of people with one shot at a time. In our city guard, only the chief inspector may be able to outdo him. Not only Li Tai, but also Chen Mu has an impression of the leader of the Black Snake Gang, because the other party once came to the city guard to bring up a person for a matter. At that time, it was the leader above him who couldn't suppress the other party. In the end, the leader came forward and personally explained it. Chapter 8. Murder. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Lu Song shook his head and said, "Who knows what's going on? Maybe it's a bad conspiracy, or maybe it's something. Anyway, in the future, we may have to deal with this Qi Jin gang." Upon hearing these words, Chen Mu couldn't help but ponder. To be honest, he is not actually interested in gang struggles, but if the Red Gold Gang annex the Black Snake Gang, the area where he lives will be managed by the new Red Gold Gang, and it is indeed impossible to turn a blind eye. The Black Snake Gang is relatively easy to talk to him as a servant. They never cause trouble in front of him, nor do they charge him any security money. But if it were to be replaced by the Red Gold Gang, they would not know what attitude it would be. But now that he has some strength, coupled with his identity as a servant, he is not too afraid, just unwilling to get into trouble. The changes in the world are like this. Chen Mu shook his head and said, "If he is not a bad person and lacks strength, this gang turnover will directly affect his survival. Brother Lu, do you know the details of this Qi Jin gang?" Li Tai lowered his voice, carefully glanced around, and then asked quietly. Lu Song shook his head and said, "I don't know much about it. I only know that the number of people in the Qi Jin gang is not large now, but there are many skilled members in the gang. It is said that there are only 2 or 3 deputy gang leaders who have trained their momentum, and more is not suitable for inquiry." Li Tai also knows the right balance, knowing too much can also be troublesome. Just a little bit is enough. At least for now, the apparent strength of this Red Gold Gang is not inferior to their city guard. Of course. Above the city guard, there is also the general headquarters, and the Qi Jin Gang is just one of the 9 factions. Even if their strength surpasses the city guard, they can at most give face to each other and not harm each other. A few people chatted for a while again, ate all the fennel beans, then left the restaurant again, inspected again, and finally returned to the city guard, handing over their respective business cards and flipping them over. At this point, the city guard also has staff members coming back in groups of 3 or 2 to take over. But just as Chen Mu, Lu Song, and others were about to leave, they saw a man wearing a blue uniform walking over. Unlike the gray clothes worn by these low-level servants, this blue garment was clearly much more exquisite. Not only was the fabric of higher grade, but the patterns embroidered on it were also different. This is the uniform worn by the head of the City Guard Bureau. Currently, there are only 5 heads of the City Guard Bureau in the entire Judeao area. The person who came here is called Qin Bei. He is the direct superior of Chen Mu, a group of poor people, in charge of Chen Mu's team. Lord Qin. As Qin Bei walked all the way, many officials present respectfully saluted. Qin Bei's gaze was serious, and he took 4 steady steps towards the inside. Then he turned around and looked at the group of servants, saying, "I'll tell you something. If we're not here, we'll inform each other." As soon as he spoke, everyone immediately fell silent and waited for the next message. Firstly, in the struggle between the Qi Jin Gang and the Black Snake Gang, no one will interfere. Whether or not there is a loss of life, it is not your business. Secondly, if you find any other abnormal actions by the Qi Jin Gang, you can report them to me or the Chief Inspector. Qin Bei spoke in a deep voice. As soon as this statement was made, the many messengers present, some with strange expressions or unchanged expressions, seemed to have already known. For example, Chen Mu and Lu Song, among others, were not surprised to know something in advance. However, Qin Bei's announcement indicates that the Qi Jin Gang will gradually take over the position of the Black Snake Gang in the future. The first principle of not intervening or interfering is equivalent to assuming that the 2 gangs will merge. The second principle is an attitude towards the newly replaced gangs, and the purpose is not to really require them to monitor, but to spread information through them, telling the Qi Jin gang that although the city guard will turn a blind eye, but they should not act too recklessly, otherwise the city guard will still intervene. Yes. Lu Song and others each responded. Qin Bei nodded when he saw everyone responding respectfully, then put away his stern expression and turned to look at Ren Yan who had just returned not far away. He waved with a smile and said, "Ren Yan. Come on, I have something to tell you." Ren Yan was immediately flattered and walked over, following Qin Bei into the squad room inside. However, in the eyes of the many servants outside, he couldn't conceal the trace of pride. Although he was still a servant, Qin Bei's attitude towards him was clearly different from that towards others. Many other servants were envious of this for a moment, but they could only envy it. After all, who allowed Ren Yan's family to meet the nobles of the inner city and learn martial arts at the inner city martial arts school? Even if he had average talent and intelligence, learning for a few years would definitely be a good skill, and his status would be greatly different. Perhaps in the future, there would be a new boss, and it would be normal for Qin Bei to have a different attitude towards him. Some young servants who had been close to Ren Yan before hoped that Ren Yan would become skilled in martial arts and take more care of them after rising to the top, so that they could also have the opportunity to change their fate. Leaving the city guard department, Chen Mu was still pondering about the matter of the Qi Jin gang. Judging from Qin Bei's attitude, it is possible that the bad guys above have already dealt with the Qi Jin gang. Regardless of any changes in the future, he is still a small bad guy and tries to go his own way without getting involved or making friends. At this moment, the sky was gradually getting dark, and Chen Mu accelerated his steps towards home. But as he reached a commonly used alley, Chen Mu suddenly wrinkled his nose and smelled a faint smell of blood. Thinking of the struggle between the Qi Jin gang and the Black Snake gang today, I realized that it may have been caused by the two gangs fighting fiercely. I didn't delve too deeply and quickened my pace, wanting to quickly pass through. Just as Chen Mu was about to pass through the alley, a cold light suddenly flashed in the lingering light of his sight. Almost instinctive. In an instant, Chen Mu drew out his poor sword and slashed towards the right side with a gust of wind. The skills he has improved through experience are not rootless duckweed, but have truly undergone rigorous training and even gained many skills out of thin air. Among them, there are also many experiences of facing enemies with people, which have made his vision and hearing much sharper than before, and he is much more sensitive to sharp weapons like swords. Ah! Coming from the right side was a blood-stained machete, seemingly possessing swordsmanship skills. However, I didn't expect Chen Mu to strike so fiercely and decisively, let alone his skillful and profound swordsmanship. Just a flash of cold light, a brief clash of swords and weapons, the opponent was hit between the chest and abdomen. At this moment, Chen Mu also saw the other person's appearance, who was a strong man wearing a coarse cloth long shirt. He actually recognized the other person and seemed to be a leader of the Black Snake gang. However, at this moment, his appearance was very tragic. Not only were there several wounds on his shoulder and arm, but even his left eye was bleeding, as if he had been poked blind. Mistake. Misunderstanding. The incense lord of the Black Snake gang endured the severe pain and struggled with each other's voices. His remaining single eye showed a hint of shock, not even realizing that a small, gray-clothed servant could suddenly display that kind of knife technique. It felt like even his unharmed heyday might not have won. He was originally being chased by the Qi Jin gang, seriously injured, blind, and on the brink of despair. Now, evil is on the verge of death, and he has to pull people to support him. No matter who it is, it would be better to have a servant. Maybe he could even dirty the Qi Jin gang and drag the city guard down, causing some trouble for the Qi Jin gang, but in the end, he kicked the iron plate. Misunderstanding. Chen Mu's eyes were extremely cold. If it weren't for his mastery of swordsmanship and quick reflexes, he might have been wiped off his neck with just a slight mistake, and even had a different head. The opponent was completely trying to kill him. This is the closest he has come to this world, facing the crisis of death. If it weren't for awakening the system, he would have been a corpse by now. Even if he remained calm and composed in his daily life, his heart would have been filled with coldness, and he would have squinted his eyes to stare at the other person. Cough. I thought you were from the Qijin gang. The incense lord of the Black Snake gang coughed up a mouthful of blood and struggled to explain, but halfway through, he suddenly swung his hand and hit Chen Mu with a fierce knife. He was already seriously injured, and just now he suffered a blow from Chen Mu's counterattack. He had almost no way to survive. In a moment, even if he was not found by the Qijin gang, he would bleed to death. At this moment, he saw that Chen Mu was so young, but his swordsmanship was comparable to his years of hard practice. His heart was filled with jealousy and malice, and he was about to take Chen Mu by surprise. Humph. However, Chen Mu let out a cold snort and was already on guard against it. He dodged the sneak attack with just one side, then turned his back with a diagonal slash and counterattacked with the second force of the strong wind. The incense lord of the Black Snake gang was already seriously injured and was at the end of his strength. He reached out to the Shuyuan website www.zhaoshuyuan.com and swung his sword with all his might. Now he could no longer avoid it, and a blood line immediately appeared on his neck. Ha! The incense lord of the Black Snake gang looked at Chen Mu unwillingly, with a hint of resentment in his eyes, but then he fell down and twitched, kicking his legs and quickly stopped moving. Looking at the body lying in front, Chen Mu's hand, which was holding the poor knife, trembled slightly. Although in the years he has been in this world, he has dealt with hundreds of corpses alone, many of which are so tragic that he has seen many of them. However, this is still the first person he killed with his own hands, and he had no grudges or grievances with him before. But Chen Mu quickly let go. This is the way things are in this world. There are people who take money and kill people without any grievances, and even those who don't like you will kill you. Without strength, he is now just a corpse. There is no reason to want to kill him but die by his sword. After quickly calming his mind, Chen Mu became even more calm than before. After all, he was accustomed to handling corpses. At this point, not only was he no longer lost, but he also bent down and quickly searched for the other person's body. Soon, Chen Mu dug out 5 ingots of silver and 2 gold leaves in his arms. The silver was about 50 taels, and the 2 gold leaves were estimated to be worth 20 or 30 taels, adding up to about 70 or 80 taels, which was a huge sum he had never dealt with before. Undoubtedly a first-hand corpse, it's the first time in recent years. After all, he is a leader of the Black Snake gang, who holds some status. After years of plundering and accumulation, it is estimated that all the money is hidden in him and he plans to run away, but he is chased by the people of the Qijin gang all the way, which can be considered a bargain for him. After touching the corpse, Chen Mu looked around and saw no one, so he quickly disappeared into the streets and alleys. Chapter 9. Stability. You are listening at novel full.audio. About a moment later, several figures appeared at the entrance of the alley, looking at the incense lord of the Black Snake gang who was lying in a pool of blood, and remained silent for a moment. Someone squatted down and examined the wound, whispering, "The wind has passed without a trace." This seems to be the sword technique of the Sun Wind Pulse in the 8 branches of Qian Tian Kuan Di. Judging from its strength and accuracy, it is estimated that you have at least mastered it. We don't have this person in our gang. He stood up and asked someone, "Chu Xiangzhu, do you want to investigate?" The man who was called the incense master looked at the body in front of him and pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, "The knife technique has been greatly improved. Well, it's better to have one less thing than one more thing. Anyway, since the person is already dead, we can also go on a mission." In recent years, there has been a mix of good and bad. If the other party has been picked up by some small character, perhaps it is still necessary to investigate. However, if it is a character who has achieved great swordsmanship, there is no need to dwell on it further. After all, those who have achieved great swordsmanship are either sect leaders, guardians of certain factions, or even the worst of the city guard. Without any grievances, there is no need to provoke them. I just don't know who this person is. Chen Mu quickly returned home and closed his door. Chen Yu watched as Chen Mu hurriedly entered the room without saying a word. Sheng sniffed slightly and smelled a hint of blood. A thoughtful expression appeared in her big eyes, and she quietly followed in, whispering. "What's wrong with brother? Encountering some trouble, it's okay now." After closing the door and carefully listening to the commotion, Chen Mu's mood calmed down. Feeling the silver and gold leaves hidden in his pocket, he found a huge sum of nearly 70 to 80 taels of silver, which was a money that a commoner's family could never earn in their lifetime. Moreover, in these chaotic times, there are many who cannot survive and sell themselves as slaves. Often, an 8 or 9-year-old girl's life is only worth less than 10 taels of silver, while men are even cheaper. 50 taels of silver is enough to buy a small courtyard in the relatively comfortable area near the City Guard Bureau, in Jushiali. Generally, at least the owner of a restaurant or pawn shop, or the leader of a small gang, as well as the deputy head of the City Guard Bureau, are needed to be able to live there. It is impossible to say that you have received such a sum of money all at once without any turmoil in your heart. But now Chen Mu is really different from before. The skill and strength of his swordsmanship have given him confidence and mentality, allowing him to hold such a silver coin and still suppress the waves in his heart. Let's first calmly analyze the situation. It's natural for him to kill me and be killed by me. Even if he finds out about me afterwards, it's not a big deal, and others may not know that he has such a large amount of money on him. Moreover, even if they do know, finding him is not a big deal. With my current ability, 7 or 8 taels of silver can still hold him back. If he were just an ordinary low-level servant who picked up a loophole and wanted to covet these 70 or 80 taels of silver, it would definitely be quite risky. Once discovered, if he didn't have to obediently hand over the money, there might be a lot of trouble, and even he would have to consider giving out most of it to the top boss, in order to get the boss's protection. But now it's different. He already has the strength to achieve great swordsmanship, and can become an incense lord in the gang. He is also qualified to be a poor head backup in the city guard department, and can still withstand it with only 70.80 taels of silver. And it was also the other party who wanted to kill him first, and was killed by him, so it all makes sense to be emotional, rational, and fisted. Thinking of this, Chen Mu's heart became even calmer. This money is enough for me to move to a better house with Yue, and my life will be much better in the future. However, it's better not to be too ostentatious. For now, hold back and see the situation. When I killed someone, there was no one around and no one knew my strength. I only knew that I was an ordinary servant, and no one might think of me. It's better to try to avoid unnecessary trouble. He has been living here in this old house since he came to this world. It has been in disrepair for a long time, with no windows and occasional leaks. In the past, he used to think about waiting for it to develop and then taking Chinyu to a better place to live. Now it's finally time. But to avoid trouble, it's best to wait a while longer. On the other hand, the daily expenses of food and clothing, which are not seen at home, can be more generous. At least the little girl can have rice, noodles, and meat every meal, and she can also replenish more blood and strengthen her body. While Chen Mu was pondering on his side, Chen Yu circled around him and finally found a small bloodstain near his clothes, which had not yet dried up. Her gaze paused for a moment, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned back to the front and deliberately extended her nose, slightly coquettishly sniffing Chen Mu's body, saying, "Brother has a smell on him. Take off your robe and I'll go wash him." Okay. Chen Mu was pondering, but he didn't pay attention to Chen Yu at the moment. He casually took off his uniform and handed it to Chen Yu. Chen Yu ran to the woodshed holding her robe. At this moment, Chen Mu recalled the thrilling scene at the entrance of the alley before and reached out to touch the knife soldier who was missing his sword. He murmured, "I do have some strength now." The incense lord of the Black Snake Gang can be considered a good hand, but in my hands, he could only walk a few rounds. Although he was seriously injured and his sword skills were scattered and weak, it was also due to the refined and powerful nature of my wind blade technique. In a sense, the Sheng forcibly elevated by the system may be more pure than the widely recognized Sheng. Chen Mu had always considered whether the system's evaluation of the dust.Sheng and the external general evaluation of the dust.Sheng could correspond 1.2.1. Now it seems that the system's standards may be higher than those of the external world. That is to say, his swordsmanship has become more solid than that of ordinary people. As he thought about this, Chen Mu immediately became more and more eager for the completeness of his swordsmanship, and the scene of practicing a gust of wind like swordsmanship. He didn't know how much his swordsmanship would improve at that time, and what kind of strong hand he could become. Perhaps it doesn't matter much in the entire city of Yucheng, but in the outer city of Jutiao, there are not many who can surpass him. Practice swordsmanship. Chen Mu breathed a sigh, pulled out his poor knife and glanced at it. He saw some blood stains still on it, so he immediately went to wash them off and began his daily practice at dusk. Nothing happened overnight. Chen Yu continued to do laundry and cooking for Chen Mu as usual, and at night she continued to pester him with stories. She fell asleep amidst Chen Mu's rambling supernatural stories. At night, Chen Mu did not fall asleep and could vaguely hear some movement outside, but only some footsteps passing by. No one paid attention to his two small rooms, nor did anyone pay attention to the city guard officer living inside. During the day, Chen Mu also breathed a sigh of relief and was almost certain that there was nothing wrong. He then went to the city guard to change his cards as usual. Coincidentally, when he arrived at the city guard to exchange cards and patrol with Lu Song, Li Tai, and others, he passed by the alley he walked in last night, but at the entrance of the alley, he saw a body lying almost unchanged, as if the Qi Jin gang had done nothing. Oh, this person seems to be the incense master of the Black Snake Gang. Lu Song was slightly surprised as he looked at the body, then approached and groped up and down, only to find nothing. In the end, he spat bitterly and said, "Tisk, it's really clean, not even half at all." In the past, he wouldn't dare to spit at a leader of the Black Snake sect, even if it was just a corpse. But now that the Black Snake sect is in decline, the leader of the incense sect is almost dead, and the former prestige is no longer there. Chen Mu remained silent and carried the body with Lu Song and others, taking it to the outside of the city and throwing it into a mass grave. This Black Snake Gang should not be able to survive. On the way back, Lu Song also sighed and said, "Gang thugs are like this. They fight and kill all day long, with their heads pinned on their pants. Although they can make some money, I don't know when they will be gone. They can't be as stable as us. Although we don't have many opportunities to make money or make progress, our lives are much more peaceful." Li Tai said, "I have a distant cousin who also joined a gang. In the first few years, he dared to fight and earned a lot of money, but one day he didn't come back. He didn't see anyone alive or dead. In my opinion, it's better to be a poor person and live a strong life. Chen, what do you think?" He smiled and looked at Chen Mu. Lu Song also smiled and patted Chen Mu's shoulder, saying, "It seems like you haven't started a family yet. When you have the opportunity, I'll find brother Zhao's Huyuan.com from Shuyuan to tell you about a marriage, so we can live a peaceful life." "No rush, no rush." Chen Mu smiled. Lu Song squinted his eyes at Chen Mu and said, "What's not urgent? You shouldn't have." Right. I don't know what it feels like, why don't you have one today? My brother will take you to have fun." Li Tai smiled and said, "Old Lu, you're really brave. I have to go talk to my sister. In law." Lu Song said discontentedly, "I have arranged this for Chen with good intentions. Why are you causing any trouble?" You dare to tear down my platform while walking around. I told you about your drunkenness that year and pulling on the pants of a Western widow. How dare you? Li Tai's eyes widened, and then he quietly felt guilty. Chen Mu only laughed off the quarrel between Lu Song and Li Tai. Before, there was no money to go to the land of romance, but now there is money, but he still has more important things to attend to. He didn't want to delay practicing swordsmanship for a moment. As soon as possible, he will have more confidence by practicing the mad wind saber technique to perfection. He will have everything he needs, so he is not in a hurry. The development of the situation was as expected by Chen Mu. The Black Snake Gang was quickly completely defeated by the Qi Jin Gang, and within a few days and nights, they disappeared completely without a single member of the gang. Gradually, the power that controlled this large area of the streets and alleys was transformed from the Black Snake Gang to the newly emerging Qi Jin Gang. During this process, there were no ups and downs regarding the death of the Incense Lord. Not to mention that someone had found him, not even heard anyone mention this matter, just like a beggar who freezes to death in a roadside ditch on a normal day, with no one paying attention. Chen Mu remained cautious and did not use the money to make any major moves such as replacing his new house. He only bought more rice, noodles, and dried meat on weekdays to improve the food at home, and added a new cotton jacket to Chen Yu. The happy little girl almost jumped onto the roof beam. Chapter 10. Half a year. You are listening at novel full.audio. That's it. Half a month has passed in a blink of an eye. Something unexpected happened to Chen Muliu. His third aunt and her family rescued Zhang Hai from prison. It is said that Butcher Zhang sought out an influential figure from his own family, and it is unclear how he begged for it. Finally, it had an effect. After nearly 2 months, Zhang Hai was released from prison. This matter was not handled by Chen Mu, so he also learned the news several days later when Chen Hong came to his door. "San Gu, come as soon as you come. You don't have to bring these rice noodles every time. I haven't been able to help you anything." Chen Mu invited Chen Hong into the room and looked at the bag of rice that Chen Hong was carrying. Accompanied by Chen Hong is also his cousin Zhang Hai. Compared to over a month ago, he has noticeably lost a large circle of weight. However, since he came out of prison, he is estimated to have rested at home for several days and his complexion has recovered significantly. At this moment, he followed Chen Hong into the house, glanced at the small and dilapidated house, and then looked at Chen Mu. There was a hint of confusion in his eyes, and he shook his head secretly. After returning, he heard that Chen Hong wanted to marry his cousin, Yu Ying, to Chen Mu. However, how could his cousin marry in such a place without a decent yard? Fortunately, Yu Ying did not agree. Chen Hong insisted on letting him come over and thanking Chen Mu in person, but he didn't think there was anything to thank him for. Chen Mu may have contributed a bit, but apart from transferring money to the prison leader, he didn't do anything. Chen Mu noticed that Zhang Hai's attitude was different, but he didn't care. Now that his strength is steadily improving and his life is getting better, his mentality is naturally becoming more stable, and he doesn't care about the opinions of others. "Don't you want me to bring some rice and noodles to visit my niece? You're not afraid to be hungry, I'm also afraid you will lose weight," Chen Hong said with a smile. Zhang Hai was rescued, and her mental state clearly returned to the same level as before, not as lifeless as last time. "San Gu." Chen Yu turned out from behind and called out sweetly. During this period, due to Chen Mu's improvement in the family's food, her complexion has noticeably improved compared to before, and she even has a sense of spiritual detachment. Her face has also grown slightly, which surprised Chen Hong and even Zhang Hai. Yue is becoming more and more beautiful. What good things did she eat? Chen Hong picked up Chen Yu's face and joked with a smile. Chen Yu sat there with a silly appearance, but did not answer. Chen Hong and Zhang Hai sat at Chen Mu's house for a while, but did not stay long. They quickly said goodbye and left. The main purpose of this trip was to tell Chen Mu about Zhang Hai, and to express gratitude to Chen Mu for the previous incident. Chen Mu escorted Chen Hong and Zhang Hai out of the door. When he turned around and closed the door, he looked at Chen Yu with a smile and said, "Your third aunt asked you what good food you have eaten during this period of time. Why didn't you say there is fish and meat these days?" Chen Yu shrunk her head and said, "If my cousin finds out, what should we do even if we stay at home and eat? My third aunt is fine, and my cousin may be able to eat 5 meals at once." Chen Mu's laughter and laughter were mixed. Although he thought Chen Yu might be fooling, it was good for the little girl to resist showing off to others. On the other side, Zhang Hai, who had left Chen Mu's house, had just followed Chen Hong into an alley when he couldn't help but complain, "Mother, how could you think of telling Yuying to be his wife? Look at his poor family, Yuying can't live a good life with him." After pausing for a moment, he thought of Chen Yu and said, But Yu's younger sister is getting more and more beautiful. If he can marry a good family, he may have the opportunity to be promoted. Having a beautiful younger sister is not entirely useless." "Nonsense." Chen Hong glared at Zhang Hai and said, "Your cousin is on duty. Even if he doesn't have much money, his life is stable and there are not many hooligans or ruffians who dare to cause trouble. This is a skill. Yue is still young, so don't have any crooked ideas." "Yes, yes." Zhang Hai's perfunctory response. Although he doesn't have much relationship with his cousin Chen Mu, he always felt that Chen Mu didn't do his best for him during his previous imprisonment, which made him even more dissatisfied. But in fact, if Chen Mu were a poor leader or even a poor company, even if he only said a word or casually asked a few questions about such matters, Zhang Hai would be extremely grateful. However, just because Chen Mu is a small low-level poor person, even if he really tried his best, Zhang Hai would not feel that Chen Mu had done anything. Things have always been like this. Day by day passed. Chen Mu practiced swordsmanship every day, rain or shine, and his experience points gradually accumulated. The step of completing the wind blade technique requires a lot of experience points, which is 3,000 points. For him, it is at least half a year of accumulation, which is a heavy and long way to go. However, fortunately, the direction is clear and there are no obstacles. As long as he works hard and perseveres, he can steadily overcome that threshold. Although the outer city remains chaotic as before, in the past he was able to navigate through more than 2 years with caution and observation, and now he has the strength to avoid causing trouble or taking care of things. Naturally, there is no trouble in finding him. Chai Fang. The poor knife in Chen Mu's hand flipped up and down, and as he waved it, it seemed to carry a faint gust of strong wind, causing dust to fly in the firewood room. However, all the dust was centered around him, rolling outwards, seemingly chaotic yet orderly. After practicing like this for an unknown amount of time, Chen Mu slowly withdrew his sword and stopped as experience +1 popped up in his sight. It's been 6 months now. He let out a sigh. Unconsciously, it has been nearly 6 months since the completion of the knife technique. He has been practicing swordsmanship for nearly 9 months since he obtained the wind sword technique and activated the system. Chen Mu summoned the system interface. Martial arts. Wild wind saber technique, Sheng, experience. 2917 points. It's almost there. Chen Mu nodded slightly as he looked at the accumulated experience. He is currently practicing swordsmanship and can obtain more than 10 experience points every day. It is not far from 300 points now. Judging from this situation, at most, another 7 or 8 days is enough to make up for it. Brother, you got up so early again. Chen Yu appeared at the entrance of the firewood room with a yawn. It's getting late. Chen Mu cleared the way and said, I'll take a break and go on a job. Alright, go out. Chen Yu pushed Chen Mu out, she's going to start a fire and cook. Chen Mu was pushed out of the firewood room by Chen Yu, and with a smile in his heart, he didn't go back to his bedroom to rest. Instead, he pushed open the door and went outside, stretching his body and taking a few breaths of fresh air. He stood at the door for a while, listening to Chen Mu's busy activities in the woodshed. Just as he was about to return to the house, he suddenly heard a commotion not far from the alley, as if mixed with crying. Early in the morning. Chen Mu shook his head. Listening to this commotion, it seems to be the voice of Mr. Wang and his granddaughter from the south of the alley. This old man Wang actually had a good life. He had a son and a daughter. Law, and the couple were doing some small business, so they were able to live comfortably. However, not long ago, their son and daughter. Law suddenly disappeared and could no longer be found. Because he had a granddaughter to support, Wang Laohan had no choice but to return to his old job and go out of the city to chop firewood with an axe. However, he was getting older and hadn't gone out of the city to chop firewood for several years. As a result, he only went a few times and accidentally broke his leg. Also caught up with the Red Gold Gang's annexation of the Black Snake Gang. Expropriate safety money on a large scale. In this world, if an ordinary family encounters one or two disasters, they can hardly get up again. Chen Mu let out a sigh in his heart. Listening to the commotion over there, he didn't go over. He just stood at the door and looked over from afar, faintly seeing two men dragging a little girl about 10 years old out. Then there was a lame old man who stumbled out and was pushed to the ground. Dead old man, your family has been owed 4 months' worth of money for settling down. You really think we're just making a fool of ourselves by looking for the Shuyuan website www.zhaoshuyuan.com. If we can't pay the money today, it's only natural for us to use your granddaughter to offset the debt. One of the men's voices came from afar along the alley. Some nearby families have heard the news for a long time, but none of them have opened the door. At most, they just peek out through the cracks of the door, and even more people don't even look, just stay indoors. Wang Laohan's granddaughter cried and struggled desperately, but couldn't hold on to two bare-armed men, being pulled further and further away. Doing evil. Doing evil. Wang Laohan fell to the ground, struggling to get up, but his cane flew to the side and he couldn't get up with his limp leg. He could only watch his granddaughter being dragged away, tears streaming down his face. This scene also made Chen Mu very unhappy. At the beginning, although the Black Snake Gang was also quite arrogant, they often did not force people to a dead end for those who couldn't afford it. However, this Red Gold Gang was even more arrogant, completely pushing people to death, even in broad daylight. The order in the outer city is becoming increasingly chaotic, and the actions of the Qijin Gang have already been taken in such a way that the city guard has ignored them. In fact, he has seen quite a few of these things. With the cautious idea of being poor and taking care of himself, he used to ignore them, but this time he is still a neighbor in the same alley, which is somewhat different. At this very moment, as Wang Laohan's granddaughter struggled and cried, she saw the only open door in his alley, as well as him standing at the door. She cried out, "Brother Chen, help me. It's just that." Chen Mu shook his head in his heart and took a few steps forward. After all, he is a close neighbor who knows his fellow villagers. If he is still as impoverished as before and can only live alone, then he can only choose to remain indifferent. Now, it is different.